so today's topic is explaining criminal behavior, criminology, right? Now, don't get too excited. It's not like you see in Criminal Minds. Yes, there's a DSU. No, they don't have a plane. It's a bunch of old guys who went to Harvard in the 70s, sitting around the table looking at case files all day. That's it. They don't make arrests, they don't do anything like that. So just trying to break that ice right away. That being said, I think it's helpful to look at what we did last class. All right. Through our last class, we were talking about the measures of crime, right? And we talked about how you measure them. We noticed and we discussed how there's been a very sharp decline in crime, but yet people think crime is continuing to rise. Right? So there's that big misconception. We have the three primary sources of criminal data. The official source is, will be the UCR, the Uniform Crime Reports, and the NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting System. We also have victimization surveys, NCBS, National Crime Victimization Survey, where we don't necessarily measure reported crimes, which is what the UCR does, but we measure crimes that occurred that haven't been reported. Right? So that's where we kind of get into the dark figure of crime. And then we look at self-report data. This usually comes from institutions like colleges and universities, and gives us an idea of how much somebody offends. I mean, how we offend. We commit crimes and we don't get caught. So again, the idea behind this is trying to get all these figures together to find out that dark figure of crime. Right? Dark figure of crime being crimes that go unreported, crimes that occur, but we just let go for whatever reason, whatever it is. We want to know that, right? Because reported crimes are going down, but theoretically, crimes could be going up, and we don't know. Right? It's that dark figure of crime. So again, it doesn't count, what we have doesn't really count for underreported crimes. So again, rape, sexual assault, inaccurate reporting, and we don't even dive into international crimes, right? So human trafficking. Right? If you take my term 3 class on human rights law, we get into human trafficking. We get to look at our big thing, specifically sex trafficking, and taking a look at and seeing how does that work on an international level, how do your rights interplay with that, et cetera, et cetera. So, that being said, we talk about criminological theory. Right? Criminological theory, if you haven't broken it down in Latin roots, ology is the scientific study of, right? And crim is crime. Right? So we're talking about the scientific study of crime. We're looking at the nature and causes of crime, the rates that crime occur, the punishment and rehabilitation of offenders, and ultimately the end goal of criminology is the prevention of crime. Right? So all these kind of get encapsulated in this term criminology. What we're going to look at today is we're going to have a big focus on structural crime theories, social crime theories, biological crime theories. We're looking at kind of why do people offend. And that's going to be our main focus for today. But you know, criminology encapsulates everything. Right? You can be just as easily called major criminology. Right? That's what my undergraduate degree was in criminology. I took the same classes as you did. Because we're talking about this whole concept is criminology. So if we want to talk about modern criminology, we have to start with this gentleman, Cesare Lombroso. Right? He is considered, we quote, the father of modern criminology, because he's one of the first people to conduct a systematic, quasi-scientific study of criminals and criminal behavior. Right? So before we kind of speculated, postulated, he conducted a very thorough scientific study that wasn't great on Italian prisoners. Right? So he basically went into a prison and he measured people's faces and different lengths between like your nose, your mouth, How wide your nose was, you get like different physical characteristics, right? And his idea, and what he asserted, was that criminal behavior is associated with physical traits that he deemed, right, again, think of the time, as pre-human and seemingly defective. And so what we ultimately get is a really, really racist undercurrent, right? Again, think about our prison population, right? African Americans are way overrepresented compared to white Americans, Asian Americans. Latino Americans are also way overrepresented. And so if we went to a prison, we started studying people's faces, well, we would see kind of a trend, right, towards we all have different characteristics, right? We all have different physical builds, right? You have Native American genes, usually you have high cheekbones, right? It all just depends upon genetics and DNA. So, yeah, it wasn't great, right? But it was the first scientific study. And it started us down this road of, okay, let's use science to understand why crime occurs. So, since Lombroso's first assertion, there have been numerous theories that we've tried to use to explain criminality and criminal behavior. So there is an extensive list in your book, page 41, but we have some examples that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. We have biological theories of crime. Right? So something innate in your biology, your DNA, your physical makeup, whatever, makes you more predisposed to crime. We have psychological theories of crime, right? Your mental state and how your mental state relates to crime. Geographical, right? So looking at locations. Right? Certain locations have more criminal activity than others. Economical, certain economic statuses we see crime affiliated with more than others. Right? Long story short, geographical and economical go hand in hand. Generally speaking, you're talking inner cities, poor people, right? Poor neighborhoods. And especially because that's where we patrol and where we do our policing. We don't go out into the suburbs, right? We also talk about cultural causes of crime, right? And one of the biggest ones that we'll look into today is sociological causes of crime, right? So how you respond to your environment, how you adapt, how you engage. Now, that being said, all of our theories so far today fall into one of two categories. Right? We have biological theories. Again, it's innate, it's in your DNA, it's in your personhood. And then we have sociocultural theories. Right? The sociocultural theories kind of combine sociology, psychology, and basically everything that's not biology. Right? So we take a look at all the different aspects of that. So we can lump everything into two categories, right? Biological and then sociocultural. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at some of the biological theories, how they kind of came about, what they look like in practice, and then we'll move to sociocultural. What we're going to see is, generally speaking, biological theories have fallen out of favor. And instead, most criminologists, sociologists, psychologists, etc., use sociocultural theories, right, and promote sociocultural theories. So, looking back again at the biology of the theories, biological theories basically say, and they're premised upon biological determinism, right? So, because of your biology, some physical characteristic that you possess, right, some biological or physical characteristic you possess, you will commit crime, right? Like it's predetermined that if you possess a certain trait, you will commit crime. That's kind of what Lombroso first did, right? That's kind of his first theories of crime. Again, he took careful measurements of prisoners' faces, noses, eye length between eyes, length of eyes. We'll look at a model here in a second to show you exactly what he looked at. Right? He also looked at the brain, or no, the skull, and when we get to phrenology, we'll talk about phrenology. So he kind of associated criminal activity with what he called a stigma of degeneration, right? So what he basically said, right, and at the time, this is what a large group of people and around the world thought, right, was that people of African descent were less evolved than people of Caucasian descent, right, of European descent. And that's kind of what Lombroso brought into prisons when he did his measurements. So he said the stigma of degeneration is we have a slanting forehead, a large jaw, defined cheekbones, large ears or eyes, long arms, twisted noses, swollen lips, etc. Right? So again, this has very clear racial undercurrents to it. Right? Because looking at different characteristics from different people from around the world, we have different skeletal structures, right, when it comes to our faces. That's why we can generalize the way we do. So he kind of played into that. Now, was his intention to be racist? I highly doubt it. Right? He was trying to conduct a scientific study of God. That being said, there's a quote from him where he's obviously attacking and associating crime with people of African descent. Right? He says criminals represented a primitive or subhuman type of person characterized by physical features reminiscent of apes, lower primates, and early humans, and to some extent preserved, said, as modern savages. Right? So it just kind of like goes from scientific down the rabbit hole to racism. Right? Saying, well, the more that they resemble, our ancestors, right, like our Neanderthal ancestors, or the more they have characteristics of apes, whatever. If they come from uncivilized cultures, they're savages, right? You can kind of see what he's starting to play at. Right? When in this at the time, the thought process was, again, white people were more evolutionarily evolved than black people. Right? And so that's kind of what he basically measures and sees in the Italian prison. And now we know today, that's complete BS, bullshit. But that's what he thought of at the time. So this is Lombroso's Focusalis Criminals. Basically, features of criminals, right? And so he took drew various portraits of the prisoners that he encountered, right, that he thought best emblematised the factors and faces of crime, right? So again, you can take a look at this closer on your PowerPoints, but you see like a slanted head, there's a twisted nose here, right? Big jawline, high cheekbones, large ears, very pissed off looking woman. I'm not really sure what's going on with her, but she's really angry looking, so maybe that, I don't know. And you can see we even have younger people up here. And they're all labeled with their names. So these were criminals that studied, labeled them with their names. And the idea was if somebody looks like this, they're going to commit crime. And that was our first thought process. And that's not that long ago. We're talking late 1800s. Right? So here's how Ombarosa measured. Right? This is how he determined what was criminal and who wasn't. Right? So you can see that there are a lot of measurements. Right? Beginning from the bottom of your chin to the top of your skull, right, where it connects to your forehead. That was one measurement. We measured across from one side of your forehead to the other, from the eyes one side to another of the eyes in terms of how far apart they were, how large the eyes were, how the eyes connected to the nose in terms of the length, the bridge of the nose, the width of the nose, the width of the cheeks, the width of the ears, the width of the side of the head, the slant of the chin. Right? So you can hear 90 or 39 degrees, slant of the chin, length of the chin, and height of the chin compared to height of the ears. And so these are kind of what he measured, but he did it systematically to every prisoner. Right, so that was theoretically a scientific undertaking. Now, we didn't get into why were these people in prison, right? Are they underrepresented? Are they overrepresented? What's happening here? But it was a scientific approach, right? And that's kind of what we see evolve. We see this approach evolve rapidly into phrenology. So phrenology, if you ever come to my office, you know, when we actually have office hours again in person, I have a head. There's a porcelain head, and it says phrenology on the bottom. And what it does is it has every portion of the skull labeled, or basically every portion of what we consider the brain, labeled for what it controls. Right? So phrenology thought the different parts of the brain control different things, which is actually true. Right? We know different parts of the brain control different things, but they got very, very specific. Whereas our parts of the brain control, right? If we have like the lizard brain, that controls our heartbeat, that controls our breathing, stuff that we don't think of consciously doing. Right? And then we have the prefrontal cortex that deals with logical thinking, rationality, fine motor skills, etc. So they were on the right path, but they got way, way too specific. So if you look, you have the different parts of the skull that the brain measured. It purported to measure everything from self-esteem to conscientiousness, benevolence, firmness, hope, wonder, I'm trying to read here, wit, individuality, form, size, weight, coloring, locality, order, eventuality, tune, language, comparison, causality, adhesiveness, combativeness, secretiveness, etc. And so they labeled each part of the skull as part of the brain, and what they did is it measures the skull, right? So the larger the portion of the skull that we said maybe controls love, well, the more that we think you're going to be able to love and have the capacity to love. Right? The smaller it is, the less capacity you have to love. So that was phrenology. That kind of comes from Ombarosa, saying, okay, well, let's look at the brain, let's look at the skull, and let's measure the actual skull. And what we saw is, again, there were some racial undercurrents here because we have different shaped skulls, right? So this would be like the ideal Caucasian skull, right? We have high benevolence, high self-esteem, et cetera, right? Low aggressiveness. But then if we can correlate that to someone of African descent, their skull shape would be different, right? And we'd see, according to our measurements, more aggressiveness, right? Lower self-esteem, lower benevolence. And again, it's their attempts at science, right? Early attempts at science. Not true in any way, shape, or form. We know that today, but at the time, it was kind of groundbreaking stuff. Some people still do practice phrenology, not criminologists or sociologists, but people that, like, people who think they're, like, I don't know, the idiots that read tarot cards, like those people, or the like psychics and stuff like that. Yeah, sometimes they practice phrenology. There are phrenologists, like people who literally measure your skull and tell you your results. Like, I'm overweight, like for me, like I'm fat. And they would say, okay, let's measure the part of your skull that controls how fat you are. Like, oh, it's big. No shit. Is what it is, right? So that's an 1895 evolution. Remember, Cesare Lombroso died in 1909. So we see this kind of evolution from his first works. That being said, I wanted you to compare it to what's called the golden ratio. Now, you might have heard this in your math class, or if you're taking a comprehensive math class. The golden ratio is basically what science has determined is how we judge somebody's attractiveness, at least attractiveness of their face. All right, so we ideally want to see equal proportions. So the picture I have up here is what we would all theoretically objectively call an attractive woman, right? Whether male or female, you can say, yeah, that's an attractive female. And it's because if we look at the measurements, right, third, like the face is in equal thirds, right? So you have the top of the eyes, the forehead is the third, top of the eyes, bottom of the nose is the third, bottom of the nose to bottom of the chin is the third of the height of your face, right? It's equal portions. Then if we look within the thirds, there are more 1/3, right? So lips, top lips, bottom of the nose would be a third. Bottom of the lip to the bottom of the chin would be a third. And what we see is if we broke it down, right? We see here we have equal distance between the eyes, right? We have this nice distance, but you see it makes a nice square with the nose. The golden ratio, there are like courses on it. There are people who, write books on it. It's decently accepted as this is how we judge people's attractiveness. When we look at their face, we instinctively do these measurements. Like even when we say math, like we just, in the back of our mind, not even consciously, do these measurements to deem if somebody's attractive or not. Right? So the more they look like the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, the more likely it is that they're going to be attractive. Virtually, like attractive to the universe. The more they differ from this, again, we're just looking at the face, not considering the body in this scenario. The more they differ, the less attractive we're going to perceive them. And from kind of an instinctual, animalistic perspective, the less likely it is that we're going to want to mate with this person, right? So that's kind of where this idea comes from. And I want you to see that the evolution of measuring heads and faces, it's still happening, right? So Lombroso got the ball rolling, and now we've discredited his theory, right? We've discredited phrenology. Now we're at the golden ratio. Okay? And it's actually a mathematical formula to determine facial type. I don't care. It's a mathematical formula that basically determines whether or not somebody is attractive or not. It's interesting, right? To say the least. But we look for proportionality, right? So if you really quick want to find out whether you're attractive, take your hand, measure from your top of your nose to the top of your forehead, hold that position, go from the top of your nose to the bottom of your nose, and from the bottom of your nose to your cheek or to the bottom of your chin. If it's relatively equal, the more attractive you're going to be. Right? The more they get spaced out, the more they kind of collapse, theoretically, the less attractive you are. So, in case you weren't self-conscious before, I want you to be self-conscious now. Because I know some of you are going back to your dorms and you're going to sit there like with your hand or a measuring tape going, what the fuck? Like, bad news, guys, like, it really is your face. Like, you might have the greatest personality in the world, but you don't need this, you're going to die alone. That's where we're at. So, again, that's kind of this evolution in terms of biology. So, if we kind of actually step forward, right, in kind of historical biological theories, we have William H. Sheldon, very well-known criminologist. And he associated criminology not with the face, not with the head, but with the body type. Right? Obviously, we all have different body types. And he identified 3 types of bodies: endomorphs, ectomorphs, and mesomorphs. Right? So He said the endomorphs, right, which is the third panel, they're more relaxed. You can't tell they're the thick, fat ones. He's like, yeah, they're more relaxed. They're less likely to commit crime, violent crime. Right? They're very just chill people. Basically, he was trying to be nice and say they don't exercise, they don't really care. Then he said, okay, on the other end of the spectrum, we have ectomorphs. Ectomorphs, they're the first picture that you see. Right? They're the long, skinny people. Right? The ones like the fat people of us like dream of becoming one day. But they're the I hate to say it this way, they're the real tall, awkward kid. Remember from like probably high school or even here, there's like some tall people that are just awkward as hell. That's them, right? And he said, okay, they're restrained introverts, right? They have self-control. They don't necessarily engage in much crime. Again, because they're constantly thinking about their body and constantly recognizing how they're awkward, et cetera, et cetera. Then he said, all right, the real problem are those fuckers in the middle, the mesomorphs. The mesomorphs, those are the ones who have the six-pack abs, right? Like the ones that we all are just like, why can't it be me? He said those are the ones that commit crime. Which for those of us who are a little bit more fluffy, we're like, fuck you. Yeah, right? Because he said they're aggressive. That's their personality type. Like if they go for a six-pack abs, they go for six-pack abs. They do hard work. Right? Like they run, they lift weights, whatever it is. But they have this aggressiveness in them, right? Not only just to exercise, look good, but also aggressiveness maybe even in terms of their career, but aggressiveness in general, right? And the more aggressive somebody is, we postulate that they're going to be more violent, right? They're going to engage in more crimes. So again, if you ever suspect somebody of stealing something of yours, right, and you have two suspects, one that looks like me and one that looks like homeboy in the middle, go with the guy in the middle, right? Like, apparently my type is just like, fuck it. So, this is biological theorist Cesare Lombroso, again, just asserted that it's inherently genetic, right? And there is some truth to the fact that our body types do depend on genetics, right? Like I acquired really shitty DNA from my mom. Like my dad and I have the same diet, right? I take care of my dad, we have the exact same diet. His cholesterol, he's 69. His cholesterol is perfect. His blood pressure is perfect. He's skinny. I eat literally the same thing. I have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and I'm fat as hell. It's just I didn't inherit the great genetics. I actually questioned my doctor about it one day. I was like, because we had the same doctor. And I was like, so, doc, you gotta tell me this. So my dad, he and I eat the same thing. Like we do eat terribly. It's one meal right before bed. That's all we do a day. Right? Worst thing you can do for your body. I'm like, and he's fine. I'm not fine. I'm like 31. Like you would think the person with high cholesterol was that guy. And she's like, oh no, it's just genetics. She's like, yeah, you didn't really get that much from your father. My mother, she was real skinny, and then she had kids, and then she struggled with her weight. So I got all those lovely genes. So there is some truth to this idea that you do inherit certain aspects from your parents, right? It's a genetic line. So theoretically, this kind of seemed to make sense, right? Like from kind of a very high level, this seems to make sense. When you dive into it, the reality is we're all criminals, right? But here's the problem. If we go with a biological theory, right, and we say that you inherit your criminality from your parents, what does that mean the most prudent course of action to do would be to eliminate crime from society? Right? So it gives credence to basically what the Nazis did. Right? Sterilization, euthanasia, reduced welfare, right? So we have somebody who genetically, they have the aggressive personality type, maybe their parents are criminal. Well, we want to stop the line there, so we'll sterilize them, right? Or it gives credence to euthanasia. Let's kill all the people that look like the guys and the girl in the middle, right? Because they're the criminals. That's a big problem, right? Because, again, the Nazis did it, and nobody's siding with the Nazis saying, hey, they had a really good idea. No, absolutely not, right? But it does give credence to this. And we actually have, in the United States, sterilized people, and there's still statutes that permit us to sterilize people from procreating. There's a very famous case, we take constitutional law, that deals with a woman who, again, I don't like to use this terminology, but it is the legal terminology, was mentally retarded. I hate, wish the law would catch up, but it had. So she was mentally retarded. There was a lawsuit, basically, that said she shouldn't have kids, right? Because it wasn't concerned for the kids, it was concerned that they would also carry on that genetic trait. So we sterilized her, right? And there was this big lawsuit about it, and it's just this long story. But some of our statutes still say we can sterilize people. When it comes to sex offenders, especially if you go into the South, sterilization is an option. Now, do we do it? No, not anymore, right? Because somebody's going to challenge that. That's going to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's going, whoa, no. Like, no matter how punitive the Supreme Court might be, there's a line that we all draw, right? And that's probably going to fall into that line. But the other hand, you could argue if you sterilize the sex offender, they have no more sex drive, right? Especially to reduce their testosterone or make them take pills to reduce their testosterone, so they won't offend again. That's the thought process, right? But it, again, we use prisons as opposed to sterilization, largely because we see a change after the 1940s, right after World War II. Like, hey, let's not be like Hitler. So that's kind of where we're at with biological theories. The biological theories really fell out of favor, right? Especially after World War II, because we're just like, no, the answer is horribleness, right? So we started to look at different theories that didn't necessarily require sterilization, but still were in that biological realm, right? So even though we have a lack of historical support, today we still have some modern theories related to crime. And these came about when we discovered DNA in the 1990s, right? And we got technological advances in the 1990s, in the 20th century. Right? And one of our most modern biological theories, again, there's very little credence given to this, it's kind of pushed aside by the criminology community, is basically abnormal chromosomes. Right, so we're going to have a brief science lesson. You have two sets of chromosomes, right? If you're female, you have XX chromosomes. If you're male, you have an XY chromosome. When you procreate, the mother contributes one chromosome, which we know has to be an X, because that's all she has. And then the male contributes another chromosome, the other chromosome, which can be an X, leading to a female child, or it could be the Y chromosome, leading to the male child. Right? So that's generally how that works. The whole situation works. So, like, whenever you decide to have kids, please don't ever have kids. I hate children. But, like, if you ever decide to be stupid and have a child, like, I don't know, I'll punch him or something. But no, if you decide to have a child, right, it's up to the male in that active population, the male's body, which chromosome he or she passes on. Right? And generally speaking, we see families that like have like 3 kids and they're trying for a girl and they get a third kid. It's like, well, what do you expect? Right? Like, he's passing on Y chromosomes. That's kind of what his deal is. There are some that pass on Ys and X's, there's some that pass on X's. It really just depends. All right, but at the end of the day, you get 2 chromosomes. That being said, there are glitches in the system that occur, right? And what we see is occasionally people get an extra chromosome. So they'll get basically 2 male chromosomes. So they get an XYY pattern, right? It's observed in men, obviously, because we have the Y. So we know, statistically speaking, 1 in every 700 males has an XYY chromosome makeup. If we want to look at what it results in, like what XYY makes you look like, you're going to be tall. You're probably going to have severe acne, or at least had severe acne, like as you were going through puberty, like very severe. You're going to have long arms, and you're going to have other skeletal irregularities, right? So it's postulated that Abraham Lincoln, right, had an XYY pattern, right? He was the tallest, scrawny, long-armed, right? Some like interesting abnormalities in his skeleton, right? So it's postulated that maybe he had that chromosomal makeup. That being said, the chromosomal makeup doesn't have to, but may result in, again, using legal terminology, mental retardation, profound mental illness. So we're talking like schizophrenia, I mean, the biggies, right? Aggressiveness, right? So outwardly aggressive, social isolation, sex deviation, and criminality. Right? So from the studies that we do, this is kind of what we see, right? Because you can be normal mentally, have a weird structure, or you have a weird structure and have mental abnormalities, right? So it's hard to think of in this day and age, right, where we're all like social distancing, when one of the big things is social isolation, right? Talking about one of the things that can result in profound mental illness. Well, you're in college. This is the years that mental illness manifests, right? We're talking like anxiety and depression, right? So don't take a look at this list and go, oh shit, I isolate, I have anxiety, I have depression, I can be aggressive, oh shit, I'm a criminal, I'm XYY predator. No, right? We're talking, these are kind of the extremes, right? We have like extreme physical life, extra Y, we have extreme testosterone in the body. That being said, these studies have very little support in terms of the community, right? Criminologists, we say no, right? Just no. The studies aren't necessarily done well. They're not very comprehensively. They're very ad hoc studies. So that gives way to our social and cultural theories, right? And we'll kind of go through these at a fairly fast clip because they are what we do now, right? They are kind of where we have headed. So we've gone from biological to socio-cultural, and we have several types of structural or socio-cultural theories, right? What is a socio-cultural theory? Well, it's something that examines, in terms of social and cultural cases, specifically the core idea suggests that an individual's place within social and cultural structure determines their criminality and their criminal behavior. Right, so basically, where are you socially? Where are you in terms of structure? Right, so this is where we're getting into sociology and psychology. Right, we're leaving biology behind. Biology doesn't work for us anymore. Sociology, psychology, this is where we're at today. So that being said, there's 2 types of categories of socio-cultural theories. The first is social and cultural structure theories. Right, so this idea is criminals are not viewed as inherently evil people, right, like we would think of from biology, but rather they're disadvantaged in terms of their social environment, right? So social structure or lack thereof, rather than the individual per se in the case, is the reason for the criminal actions, right? So what structure they have in place or the lack thereof. Then we have social and cultural process theories, right? And we say, okay, criminality isn't necessarily limited to your environment, but it's actually a function of your individual socialization, right? So what it does is it focuses on interactions with social and cultural institutions and the process of socialization via peers, family, education, and employment. All right, so it looks like how are you socialized? What are your norms? Every community has sub-communities and sub-sub-communities and sub-sub-sub-communities. Each have different norms, different practices, different traditions. Right, us in this room, like we all have different practices, different norms, different traditions from each other. Right, it's because of individual socialization. Right, and so these two can get mixed fairly easily. Right. Again, social cultural structure theories, talking about it's because of your environment. Process theories, it's because of your socialization. Right? So let's jump into some. Right, specifically, these are some of the main structural theories. Again, this is where we're at today in terms of trying to define and explain crime. So our first is social disorganization theory. Right? And this kind of comes from the idea that we have disadvantaged neighborhoods where there's a subculture of delinquency, which is approved behavior, and criminality that results from it was acquired from these social and cultural settings through a process of interaction. So what does that mean in plain English? It means, all right, we have communities, sub-communities, sub-sub-communities, etc. Right? Think of an inner city neighborhood, right, that's maybe controlled by gangs. They're inner cities, so they're disadvantaged, right, in terms of resources and things like that. In gang-run neighborhoods, generally speaking, juvenile delinquency and juvenile behavior that's not comporting with what we consider the norms of society is rewarded, right? Because we're slowly socializing the children into the gang, right? So it starts out small and it's rewarded. Now, the parents might not like it, but they have little control because of where they're at, right? They're kind of stuck in this neighborhood, and this is the neighborhood culture. So they have to deal with it, right? We say because of this culture, right? Because we approve of your delinquency, we approve of your criminality, you're going to retain that criminality, right? You're going to join that gang. You're going to try to go up in the gang. You're going to try to do what the gang wants you to do, etc. Then we have Anomie Theory. This one basically says persons living in a disadvantaged area, it's alienated, they feel worthless, and their efforts to try and achieve something else are fruitless. And without available alternatives, the person falls into crime. So what does this mean? This means, all right, you're in a disadvantaged neighborhood or you're in a disadvantaged situation. All right, you work your butt off to get out of this. Right? You're in projects, you're working your butt off to get out of the projects. And you can't, right? Because maybe you didn't have the education, you didn't have whatever to get you that job that will get you the money to get out. So you've got to make a rational choice, right? You say, okay, I can continue working my butt off to no end, or if I switch over and kind of join this gang, they're all driving like Mercedes. Right? Like, I have guaranteed income. I'm going to make a lot more money if I switch over to criminality. Right? Or maybe they drop back, we don't have a gang, but we have individual criminality. Like, all right, fine, I'll rob a bank. Right? That's kind of the notion. Like, you just get so frustrated, you just get to the point where like, I can't anymore. I can't do this. And you fall into criminality. Then we have general strain theory. Basically, this says strain, and there's various types of strain we'll talk about, creates negative emotions, right? Creates anger, anxiety, etc. for the individual, which in turn create the inclination towards deviance and criminal behavior. So strain is basically anything that makes you feel bad or doesn't go your way, makes you disappointed, right? You all are in college, right? So you have privilege. And some more than others, but you have privilege. If something doesn't go your way, you get an F on your test or something like that, yeah, you get bummed out, you might get mad, but you don't then just turn around and go, screw it, I failed the test in Dr. Clay's class, I'm just going to run with it. Like, it doesn't happen, right? Strain is usually kind of systematic, right? So again, we're thinking poor neighborhoods, right? You're poor. What causes a lot of strain? Especially if you have kids, right? Let's say the family's broken up. There's more strain there. So you have poor, you have kids we got to take care of. How do we get this money? I'm a single parent dealing with these kids. You know, how am I supposed to keep a job and do this? I'm living in the projects, right? That's embarrassing for me. That causes strain. Or there are maybe gangs that control the projects. And I try to avoid them, or I have to pay them off. That causes more strain. Maybe I go to job interviews, but I don't have clean clothes. Causes more strain. Then I don't get the job. More strain. And you see it starts just to build up and build up and build up on a person until that person just gets angry, or anxious, or just depressed, and says, you know what? It's fine. And they kind of just do this shift mentally, saying, I'm going to follow down the criminal path. Right? It's not necessarily a conscious thought process. They sit down and they weigh out the pros and the cons, but it's this kind of mental shift of kind of almost like a knowing, where you're just like, I'm tired of this. Right? You know, you all have had that point where you love college, where you get to that breaking point where you're gonna have tears, and you're just like, yeah, I've had it. I'm done with all of this. And like, you're in fucking college. Like, okay. Like, not to say that's not serious. It obviously is serious, and then you should definitely see a counselor or something like that. But that kind of brokenness pales in comparison, right, to other people's reactions to brokenness and the problems that they have, right? Where they're life-changing decisions, right? Where it's just, well, why are you selling crack? I've got 3 kids, right? The nearest place around here is McDonald's. They pay $9 an hour. I can't raise a family of 3 plus myself on $9 an hour. If I sell crack, every customer, I'm making 60, 80 bucks. And I have several customers per hour, which doesn't make more sense to do. Right, so that's where we talk general strain. And then we have conflict and cultural deviance theories. Basically, again, this is crime results from a conflict between the norms, values, and goal orientations of one social or cultural group and the legal codes imposed upon an alternative social group that basically shape the power, shape the policies, and shape what the lower powered group can do. Right? So this is very much a black and white issue, right? Historically, it's going to change, but historically, I mean, even to this day, it's absolutely true, right? Most people in Congress are white, right? And have been since the founding of this country, right? There are very few African Americans, very few Native Americans, very few Asian Americans, what have you, in Congress, right, in the Senate. So what you have is you have a bunch of wealthy or middle-class white people telling everyone to live the lifestyle they live, but their lifestyle is right. So like, if you're middle-class and white, going, okay, that's fine on me, that works. But maybe you have a different culture, you have different attitudes, or you're not represented. Then we're forcing our beliefs and our culture upon you, saying our culture and our beliefs are better than yours, right? Obviously, that causes conflict, and the conflict results in deviance. So if we look at the process theories, those are the structures, the process theories. So we look at the first one. The first one is actually one of my favorite ones. It's cultural learning theory. And basically what it says is crime and deviant behaviors and norms that are linked with criminality, right? It's learned. Crime is learned. All right, you don't just kind of fall into it. You don't just say one day, I'm going to go commit crimes. Right? It's a learned behavior. You look at the people around you and what they do. Right? Think back like to junior high or high school. Right? You look at like the upperclassmen, you look at like a different, like the popular group. You're like, oh, they wear this type of clothes. So you go out and try to buy this type of clothes. Right? That's kind of the thought process behind learning theory. Right? It's just called learning theory, but it's this notion that you're in this environment where people just commit crime, and it's part of the norm. Right? You don't think of it any differently. You don't think of it as this is a crime. You think of it as, well, my dad sold crack, and now I'm going to sell crack, and my kids are going to sell crack, and it's just kind of this learned behavior. And the idea is we can break learning theory, we can break the chain. Then we have social control theory. Now this one is an interesting one because it assumes that people are rational beings and we're motivated by the desire to maximize our pleasure and minimize our pain. Thus, benefits, regardless of a person's deviance or conformality, of and to social control theory are mechanisms that keep individuals from acting in deviant ways. In other words, we're going to sit down and we're going to say, have a pros and cons list. Right? We're rational beings. We're going to say we want to maximize our pleasure, minimize our pain. How do we do that? For a lot of us, right, for all of you, you're maximizing your pleasure by going to college. Right, so you can get a good job, right? So you can do better with your parents, that you can have a family, whatever it is. You're trying to maximize your pleasure by going to college. Right, and then doing so, minimize your pain. Minimizing your pain and taking like easy classes, right? That's that rationale behavior. And the idea is that criminality is the same way, right? If I commit crime, and it's better for me than if I don't commit crime, why the hell wouldn't I commit crime? Right? Rational beings. That's the problem that I have with it. Rational beings. Have you met people? I've met a lot of people. Most of them are fucking idiots. They're not rational. We're not rational people. We're not. We're controlled by emotion. Like we're like 100% emotion. If we were rational, we would do things a lot differently. Right? But we're not. We go off with instincts and hunches and feelings. And that's where I see this having a problem. Like the benefit, the maximizing, and minimizing, that makes sense on paper, but if you apply it to actual people, that's not how people act. Right? That's not how they respond. Maybe it's something that we know is inherently wrong. Well, that changes the analysis. Right? There's something that we're emotionally driven towards, emotionally driven from. Right? Let's say that there was, I don't know, somebody in our family got shot. Right? Let's say that happened. Okay, it might be beneficial for you to shoot somebody else, right? You shouldn't get a shot of, but you realize how much pain that caused your family. Right? So you don't do the thing that maximizes your pleasure. You restrain and you stay kind of in that pain. So again, it doesn't necessarily capture what you really are. Right? It makes sense on paper, but in practice, it just doesn't work. And then we have labeling theory, right? This one, it says most, if not all people break rules now and then, which is true. You know, at times you commit 3 to 5 felonies-ish and a slew of misdemeanors, right? And 99.999% of you will never get caught, right? I mean, think about it now. Like, a lot of you get engaged in underage alcohol drinking, right? Like, that's a misdemeanor. You haven't been caught. Or if you got caught, it was by an RA and what that big deal. So that being said, you don't think of yourself as a criminal. right? You don't say, I'm 19 and I had a beer. I'm now a criminal. You don't think of yourself as a criminal. You don't say, I identify as a criminal, right? That being said, when we do define ourselves as a criminal, or somebody defines us as a criminal, then we just fulfill that role, right? So if I say something along the lines of you know, let's say again, let's say I'm a crazy racist, and I'm like, yeah, you know, you're a young black guy. Of course you're going to commit crime. And I label you as criminal. And suddenly, maybe you take my words to heart, or other people also label you the same way. What are you going to do? You're going to follow what you've been labeled, right? That's why I always say when people, I always get ticked off when somebody calls an offender, somebody who breaks the law, a monster. I hate it because it takes away their personal responsibility. Right? Because if you call somebody a monster, well, how's a monster supposed to act? Like a monster, right? So when people are like, oh, that person's a monster, you're like, no, you're letting them off the hook. No, they're a fucking killer. There's a difference, right? So again, how we label people is how we act. If you grow up and you've been told the whole time that you're a monster, you're worthless, you're not part of a community, whatever, at some point that's going to click, and you're just going to fine. Fuck it. I'm going to act the way I'm supposed to act. Right? So labeling here does get actually quite a bit of traction as well. Then we have mixed theories. So this is one that I did my undergraduate thesis on, was a biochemical theory, right? And basically biochemical theory looks at our nutrition, right? And it says, all right, let's look at a body's chemistry. There is a relationship, right, between aggressive behaviors and diet. Right? So aggressive behaviors can be controlled by diet that is higher in protein and lower in refined carbohydrates. Right? Which we know today is kind of like what you're supposed to be doing, right? What you're supposed to take in. That being said, when we sample criminal populations, right, when we've drawn blood and the voluntary studies of criminal populations, we have found that they lack vitamin B3 and B6 in comparison to non-criminals. And so we went up to the hill, we drew blood from everyone there, we drew blood from everyone on campus. Theoretically, on campus, we would see higher levels of B6 and B3, lower levels of prisoners up on the hill and that. Now they can be used in conjunction with social and cultural and structural theories, right? So specifically, if you look at like high crime neighborhoods are often located in what's called a food desert. A food desert basically says there isn't a source of fresh food within X many blocks of where you live, right? So think about the city. And it's usually defined by low income status, but think about a city. Inner city, where's the nearest grocery store? Right, are they going to open like the Trader Joe's or something like that in like south side of Chicago? Probably not, right? Are they going to do it in a white suburb? Sure. That's the rationale here, right? Is okay, I don't have fresh food, so what do I have to turn to? Well, there's McDonald's around the corner. So people are literally living off of McDonald's. And then we say, why are they messed up? Like, have you ever eaten McDonald's and went, I feel good about this decision? No, never in the history of ever have you been like, I'm really glad I did that. No, doesn't happen. Right? And we see big box bans which say like Walmart's. Walmart tried to get to Chicago for a long time, a few years ago. And they passed a big box ban saying the idea was like, to help mom and pop shops, saying if you're a big box retailer, you can't come in. And it screwed the poor people because Walmart has a produce section, right? They have fresh food. Our law said, no, you can't commit. So we had to continue eating McDonald's and Burger King and fast food and Chinese takeout. And guess what? That's not good for our body chemistry, right? So the idea is the results keep coming out. Next class, we're going to look at the process of justice. So now that we know crime rates, what crime is, we know law, right? What causes people to commit crime, then we're going to say, okay, once people commit a crime, what does the process of justice look like from there?